Alright, we're back for another video on the skull. Let's start with this bone right here. This is the frontal bone. We've got some important parts of the frontal bone we have to know, including this part right above the eye socket. This is the supraorbital margin. Remember, of course, supra means above, so we're above the orbit. That's where your eyebrows are roughly going to sit. Now, we can't do it on this skull, but if we were to chop a hole right in here, if we were to puncture it, I probably shouldn't punch the skull, right? Really? We would see an open space in here, a cavity in here. That cavity in here is called the frontal sinus. Remember, a sinus is a cavity within a bone. Main job of sinuses is to make mucus, which drains into the nasal cavity. Sinuses also make your head a little bit lighter, makes your neck get a little less tired, and do some other cool things. But in here we would find the frontal sinus. Other parts of the frontal bone we've got to know, we might come back to some. Let's kind of move down a little bit. Here is our zygomatic bone, and the zygomatic bone has a couple of different pieces that stick out. The piece that sticks out is often called a process. And coming back right here, this is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. It's called the temporal process because it's going towards the temporal bone. So this is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Now, to make things a little bit more fun, if we go back and we have our temporal bone right here, we've got a piece of the temporal bone coming forward. Since it's sticking out, this is a process as well. And this process is going towards the zygomatic bone. So it's called the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. So you got to make sure you say the whole thing, or else you'll get things marked wrong. The whole combination of these two processes is called the zygomatic arch. Right above the zygomatic arch, we can find the sphenoid bone, which we might have seen on the last video. We stick with the temporal bone here. We've got some different parts to it. This part right up here is pretty flat. So because it's pretty flat, it gets the adjective squamous. Remember, squamous means flat or scale-like. And this is the squamous portion of the temporal bone. Other parts of the temporal bone that we see, we've got a hole. We've got an ear hole. I'm not going to call it the ear hole, of course. That would be too dumb. We're going to call it the external acoustic meatus. External because it's on the outside. There's going to be one on the inside, too. Acoustic because it's going to be involved in hearing. And meatus is another word for hole. What else? We have a bump back here, bump right behind the ear, called the mastoid process. This is the mastoid process, and some old anatomist thought it looked like a breast, so he called it the mastoid process. This shows you what people used to, where their minds were back in the day. All right, other things we see. We've got a process right here called a styloid process. If you ever use a stylus on your computer or your Nintendo DS or something, you know what a stylus is, and there's a styloid process. These guys are mainly used for attachment to muscle, so muscles can have something to grab and pull upon. Other things with the temporal bone, we got to kind of take off the brain case here, and if we rotate and look inside, we've got this ridge right here. This is part of the temporal bone as well. This is called the petrous portion of the temporal bone. Somebody thought it looked kind of rocky. So the word petrous refers to its rockiness. And I was trying to do some air quotes with my fingers right there. I don't know if you could catch that.
I didn't get them.
Probably zoomed in too much. It's okay. Inside here, this is where we're going to find the little bones in the ear, the auditory ossicles. All right, that's pretty much it for the temporal bone. One other quick thing, and to see it, I got to kind of take my mandible off here. And if I take my mandible off, there's a little depression right here called the mandibular fossa, where the mandible is going to articulate. Why don't we call it quits for this video? We'll come back and do another one soon.